Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. The long-awaited Republican memo alleging FBI surveillance abuses during the 2016 presidential campaign was finally made public Friday after President Trump declassified the 4-page document. The House Intelligence Committee releasing it over the objections of FBI and Justice Department officials, as well as Democrats on the panel. The memo, commissioned by committee chair Devin Nunes, claims, among other things, that the FBI used an unverified anti-Trump dossier, partially funded by Democrats, to get a surveillance warrant on Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger and Potomac Watch columnist Kim Strassel, who's been following this story from the beginning. So, Kim, what's the most important thing viewers should know about the Nunes memo?
The most important thing that they should know is that we now have confirmed that a document that was paid for by the Clinton campaign and by the Democratic National Committee was used as an essential part, those are the words in the memo, of an application to get a warrant to spy on the rival presidential campaign, the Trump campaign.
All right.
And they should also know that the FBI was not straight up with the court in terms of what it did and did not tell it.
It did not inform the court, the FBI did not, fully about the political background of the document, of the Steele dossier. Is that what the point?
Yeah, the point is that not only did they use this document, but they did not tell the court that it was being funded by a rival campaign.
Okay, now some of the reporting has said that the FBI, in fact, did say, look, there was a political origin here, or maybe a political motivation. But what about your sourcing? What does your sourcing say? Did they ever say, did the FBI use, according to your sources, tell them about the Clinton campaign's role?
They never mentioned the Clinton campaign's role. That is not in the FISA application, nor did they even say major political party or the words political party. They said there was some sort of a political connection. But by the way, if you're a FISA judge, that could mean anything. It certainly wouldn't hold the same weight as saying that it was the Clinton campaign. And the fact that the FBI didn't suggests that it knows it would have mattered to the FISA court as well.
Okay, so I guess the question is, Kim, some critics are saying, well, so what? There's all kinds of motivations that people have for putting together documents, and the FBI's job in asking for a warrant isn't to prove everything. It's just to say, look, this is some evidence we have, and now let's give us the authority to eavesdrop on this person who we think it could be a foreign agent.
No, this matters because of the way the FISA court works, Paul. Remember, this isn't a court that has a prosecution and a defense coming in to argue both sides.
Right.
The only people who appear before it are the FBI or the applicants and the Justice Department.
Right.
And so the court depends on those people to tell them and be incredibly candid and frank with them if they have anything that would undermine the credibility of their evidence or their sources. That's a big detail, and it's really out of bounds that they wouldn't have told the court.
Dan, you know, we go back, you and I, back a long way on FISA before they had this process. It was set up in the 70s after the abuses of that era on surveillance. And I never liked the idea because I thought it diluted political accountability. It introduced a court where the FBI, if they went in the wrong direction, could say, oh, well, the judge approved it. That's fine. But it seems to me if you're going to have a FISA process, isn't this the most basic information you ought to tell it about in the middle of a presidential campaign in particular?
Yeah, I think so, especially given the basis, the rationale for the FISA court. I mean, understand here that what they're seeking an order to be able to surveil is a U.S. citizen.
Right.
In this case, it was Carter Page. Now, it was raised back then was American citizens have a right to privacy, and they have a right not to be unobtrusively surveilled by security agencies like the FBI. So
Sure.
You better have a pretty good reason if you're going to do that. Now, in this instance, wind back the sequence a little bit. They sought the order and got it in October of 2016, all right?
Right.
A month before that, the Associate Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr interviewed Christopher Steele, the compiler of this dossier, and in that interview, Orr acknowledged, Steele said that he was intensely interested that Donald Trump not win the presidency. Now, that should have been a big red flag to Bruce Orr, who's one of the highest officials and he should have transferred that forward to the people seeking this order from the FISA court. And I think at that point, the FBI should have said, we've got a little bit of a problem here because this thing looks like a political document. We're asking the court to approve the surveillance of a U.S. citizen. Instead, they went forward knowing that, and that's what's on the table now.
Kim, what about the role of the press in this? Isn't that, tell us about that in this dealing with the FBI and Steele.
Well, I think that's the FBI's other problem. Dan's talking about a month before they filed the application. Well, a month before they filed the application, Steele also went out talking to the press, breaking one of the cardinal rules of an FBI source. And in fact, they would later terminate him for doing it again. But the FBI had to have known that he was out there talking in the press and that he was therefore exhibiting a partisan motivation, that this was designed to help the Clinton campaign. And yet they still went ahead with the FISA application and didn't say anything about that interaction to the court.
All right. Thank you, Kim. We're going to pick up more of this shortly. When we come back, the political fallout from the surveillance memo has been swift as Democrats react to its release. So what's behind their objections, and what does the memo mean for special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe? Reaction to the release of the memo was swift, with Democrats on the Intelligence Committee blasting it as a shameful effort to discredit the FBI and Department of Justice. But President Trump says the memo vindicates him, tweeting, quote, "This memo totally vindicates Trump in probe, but the Russia witch hunt goes on and on. There was no collusion and there was no obstruction." The word now used because after 1 year of looking endlessly and finding nothing, collusion is dead. This is an American disgrace. We're back with Dan Henninger and Kim Strassel. So, Kim, at one point, just to follow up on the point about the press, at one point the FBI in its FISA application used a news story whose main source was Christopher Steele to corroborate the dossier produced by Christopher Steele.
Yeah, and this is an example, by the way, of just how they didn't treat correctly with the court. You don't go in there with a newspaper story. Sometimes they'll put things in there just to sort of back up another fact that they're making. But this time they actually use that news story as if it was further evidence of Carter Page and him spying and the problems that there were, instead of noting that it came from the exact same source as the dossier, which it had also submitted.
Okay, let's take the criticism of this, Kim. Democrats are saying, look, it's incomplete. The memo omits certain important information and doesn't get everything that was in fact filed in the application. How important do you think, is that fair? Is that a fair criticism?
No, I don't think it is a fair criticism. Look, the important things that you need to know here is that we now know that this dossier, unverified, paid for by a political campaign, was used to get an application to spy, or used to spy on another American. And we know that they didn't fully present everything to the court. Right. Those are just facts, and you can't get around them.
Okay, but the Democrats are going to release their own memo next week. They say they have an analysis. My own view of that is, let's have it. Why not? Let's get it out. Let's see what it is. And I would go even further and say, let's get the president declassify all the underlying documents, the FISA applications, what the FBI did or didn't interview during the process. I think at this stage, it's so poisoned. Let's get it all out.
Oh, I totally agree. And, another thing we should get out, Senator Chuck Grassley has his own referral for Christopher Steele to the Justice Department for a criminal investigation. He's been trying to get that declassified, too. That should come out. Put out everything. Let the American people judge who's spinning.
All right, Dan, on the Mueller probe, I don't think this does vindicate Trump in the sense that Mueller is still doing what he's doing. We don't know what else he knows. He is going to go ahead and plow ahead.
He is going to plow ahead, Paul, but I do think the president has a point. This has been going on since last January. We're no closer to finding proof of obstruction or collusion than we were back then. And my fear is that we are really driving this, we, the political system, towards a genuine political crisis.
How would you define that crisis? What do you mean?
A loss of faith in the system. I mean, Republicans thinking the Democrats have nothing more on their minds than to take down a president who was duly elected last November, has been functioning for over a year. Why at this late stage are they still trying to take down the president on the basis of the little that we see so far? Well, and then you have the question of whether the FBI was a party to this, because the press seems to keep reporting that FBI sources are telling them that there was more to this memo. So why is the FBI itself still trying to participate in that process?
So, Kim, where does this go from here? Next week, I guess we'll get maybe the Democratic memo out. Then where does all this head?
Look, we're going to get the Democratic memo, and I think that there's going to continue to be pressure to release more because of this so-called dueling narratives out there. One thing I would look for is to see what, if any, action any of these FISA court judges take. You know, they had to have been pretty astounded to have read some of the details out there, too. They have the ability to come back and potentially scold or issue their own memo or their own writing to explain how they felt they were treated and whether or not they're demanding reforms.
All right, and the Inspector General at the Justice Department is conducting his own probe about how the Clinton email case was handled by the FBI. 10 seconds, Kim.
Yep, and that's going to be another big explosive thing. We have to assume that that's at least some of the reason why some of these FBI officials like Andrew McCabe, have been leaving.
All right, thank you all. Still ahead, President Trump delivering his first State of the Union address this week. So how did he do? Former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer is here with a look at the president's performance and the Democratic response.
This, in fact, is our new American moment. There has never been a better time to start living the American dream. So to every citizen watching at home tonight, no matter where you've been or where you've come from, this is your time. If you work hard, if you believe in yourself, if you believe in America, then you can dream anything. You can be anything. And together, we can achieve absolutely anything.
That was President Donald Trump proclaiming a new American moment as he delivered his first State of the Union address. And after a turbulent first year in office, the president made a pitch for bipartisan cooperation on issues like immigration and infrastructure. But deep divisions were on full display in the House chamber Tuesday night as Democrats sat silent through most of the president's remarks. Ari Fleischer served as White House press secretary for President George W. Bush. He's now a Fox News contributor. So, Ari, welcome. One of the roles of a State of the Union, one of the things you'd want to accomplish as a president, is set the stage for the agenda for the coming year. How well do you think the president did on that point?
Well, his agenda is the major initiatives. He did very well. He laid out two remaining major initiatives: tax reform done in the can, and then the two more, infrastructure and immigration reform. He didn't do the laundry list. He did the major dry cleaning.
Right. Well, that's interesting, and because I see most thinking about, I've been fated to watch too many State of the Union addresses, and one of the things you see is a little more substance on some of the issues. The president zeroed in on immigration in detail, but on some of the others, they were almost one-liners. You know, let's do something about prison reform. Infrastructure, great. Permitting, move on. Not a lot of detail.
And that's consistent with Donald Trump. Trump, from the days of his candidacy, has not focused on a deep level on policy, on initiatives. It's much more about personality and about being the businessman who can go to Washington to change Washington. You know, I remember, Paul, during the campaign, he went to Idaho and gave a major energy speech and drowned it out by holding a news conference ahead of his speech, and the only thing people wanted to talk about was who's up or down the polls.
Right.
Policy is not what motivates him. It's personality a little bit more.
Okay, how did you think he did on framing the immigration issue? Because, you know, I mean, one of the things that I've heard from Democrats, and he needs Democratic votes, as the president said, you know, they thought that he was a little too much speaking to his own base. And he had that jibe in there, you know, Americans are dreamers too. Well, look, I mean, the point here is that the dreamers want to become Americans, full-fledged Americans, and Trump is offering him that, but he kind of spoke to his base and didn't try to bring in Democrats enough. That's at least the criticism from the left. What do you think?
You know, as somebody who is dedicated to this issue and remains in my heart and in policy-wise a George W. Bush, proud to be comprehensive immigration reform Republican, because I believe in immigrants. I believe how they make us a better, stronger country, and I'm the son of an immigrant. I actually think Donald Trump is, like Nixon going to China, the only guy who can do it.
Right.
George Bush tried. We couldn't get it done. Barack Obama didn't really try. He didn't get it done. Trump can, because the Democrats know that they have to compromise with him if they really want to get something done. So I actually think, Paul, this is much more an issue of how will the Democrats behave than how will Donald Trump behave. One thing I would have done as a rhetorical flourish if I were Donald Trump, at the State of the Union, I'd have looked at Republicans in the eye, shifted left, focused on them, and said, I am prepared to compromise. Shift right, Leader Pelosi, Leader Schumer, are you? And let that hang there.
And tell
because I think there's a lot of strain on the Democrats not to compromise, and he needs to push them to get there.
And speak to the dreamers directly and say, look, I'm willing to give you a path to American citizenship, but the Democrats have to meet me halfway. You need to tell them, dreamers, to do the deal. I think that would have been very effective, probably more effective.
That would have been good, too. And face it, the thing that's stopping this from getting done is the wall. And the reason that Democrats oppose the wall is because Donald Trump is for it. Right. I haven't seen the Democrats go to San Diego and say, tear down the wall. We have hundreds of miles already of existing walls that do their job. So the only reason the Democrats don't want to do it is they don't want to give Trump the victory on the wall. And that's just not good policy. That's not how you do business. I do think Donald Trump should travel more. He should go to San Diego and go to the wall that is there that all parties say is an essential piece of American security and immigration, and make the case. If the Democrats don't like walls, what's wrong with this one?
The other thing that I think one of the goals of the speech, certainly from the White House, was to try to improve Trump's general approval rating across the country, his image, look more presidential. How well did he do on that?
Big issue. It remains to be seen, but I suspect he's about to get a continued uptick. He's already been on a one-month roll. Since tax reform and since the Democrats' failed effort involving the shutdown of the government, Trump's numbers have been improving, Paul. It's an interesting trend to watch. He's up 8 on his Real Clear Politics favorable and favorable average as of a couple of days ago, and that's before you can measure the State of the Union. So I expect that's going to continue to improve. Now, he's still underwater. Right. He has a long way to go. But that's a very important movement. It's really his first movement of any duration of his presidency in an upward direction.
Well, and I would argue that part of that is just success. Tax reform, getting it done. He campaigned on getting things done. This is the first big achievement. Does he need a couple of more deals like this year, or can he just get through it by saying, I'm willing to deal even if Democrats don't?
Well, he has 3 things that he just did that are going for him. 1 is tax reform, which is now increasingly being felt. 2 is the Democratic shutdown, as I mentioned. Now 3 has yet to be measured. It's about to be the State of the Union. So going forward, he needs 2 things, Paul. 1 is continued accomplishments. The American people elected a disruptor to get things done, not just to disrupt. The second is to be normal, to have a normal presidency like the State of the Union was, where the focus is on policies and ideas and himself. The problem he's gotten into very often is he's moving the ball down the field and then he commits an unnecessary roughness penalty with one of his tweets, or he goes too far and attacks somebody, and all of a sudden penalty flag comes in and he loses the yardage he gained. More discipline, fewer angry bursts, more policy, more accomplishments. And he'll probably be at a 50% job approval if he can do that by mid-year.
Well, we'll hold you to that prediction, Ari. Thanks for being here. When we come back, the president offering an open hand to Democrats in his State of the Union speech and calling for a compromise on immigration. So can the two sides make a deal ahead of next month's deadline?
Tonight, I am extending an open hand to work with members of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, to protect our citizens of every background, color, religion, and creed.
President Trump extending an open hand to Democrats in his State of the Union speech. The president saying he is open to a fair compromise on the thorny issue of immigration and calling on Congress to take up the White House reform proposal, which includes a pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million so-called dreamers in exchange for border security, limits to family-based chain migration, and an end to the diversity visa lottery. We're back with Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, columnist Kim Strassel, and columnist and Manhattan Institute senior fellow Jason Riley. So, Jason, President says this offer of his is right up the middle, but it's getting attacked from the left and the right.
Exactly.
What do you make of it?
Well, it is a compromise, Paul. We know that. There were, you mentioned the so-called dreamers here that he's trying to help out. Originally, he was just going to provide some concessions to the dreamers that had signed up for DACA.
About 700,000.
He expanded that to people who were too afraid to sign up. I mean, which is an even larger population.
Another 1.1 million.
So again, I think the president is trying to reach a compromise here. What we don't know is whether the Democrats are truly interested in a compromise. And the first sign that they may not be is the fact that many of the elements in this bill were in a 2013 bill that both Chuck Schumer and Senator Richard Durbin not only supported, but co-sponsored.
This is the border security component.
Exactly, the border security component, the end of the diversity lottery, and amnesty for some illegal immigrants. So, again, I'm not sure if the Democrats really want a compromise, but it's clear that the president does.
Dan, what about the folks on the right? Because Trump is getting a lot of heat on the right for allowing any kind of legalization. Oh, they're calling him Amnesty Don, for example, because the Dreamers will get amnesty. And what do you make of that?
Well, the word amnesty has been used to thwart immigration reform since at least the 1980s, all right? So you've got this great ocean of immigrants in the United States. We argue politically over it, kick the can down the road, nothing gets done. One difference here, the so-called dreamers, 700,000 or so of them, if this doesn't get done, we start deporting them back to their countries, okay?
Well, not instantly. The work permits stop at first.
The work permits stop.
But they are eligible for deportation.
They're eligible for deportation. Many back to countries where they don't even speak the native language. So they have elevated this issue politically in a way that one party or the other is going to get some blame if this fails. Now, I know the right seems to think it doesn't matter with American voters. I think it's wrong. I think the Dreamers have changed the dynamics of the immigration debate in a way where you have most people out there in the public saying, we want you to do something about these people and resolve this.
Kim, what do you think about the parameters here? Is there a narrower bill, perhaps, than the president has proposed that could get through? In other words, could you maybe take out the chain migration portion, which seems to be what the Democrats are really worried about, and maybe get a deal that way?
Look, I think the important thing to remember is that President Trump is a deal maker. So when he comes out with an offer, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a done deal. It's his starting opening bid. So I think even the White House is open to the idea of further negotiations. Yes, if you maybe took out the chain migration piece or expanded it so that it wasn't quite as tight as it is right now, restricting it simply to spouses and immediate children, maybe you could fiddle with that a little bit, maybe some changes in the visa lottery proposal. But look, this is a question of Democratic sincerity on this topic. At this point, you have a president who has offered more in terms of Republican concessions than you've seen in a very long time, and Democrats seem just to be coming up with excuses for a reason not to work with it.
Yeah, the two sides, Jason, have had a veto over the other on this for a long time. No, so if you want everything, you're not going to get it.
Right, exactly, and it's clear that the president is willing to give some of his Republicans cover on this issue. The hardliners, he knows, are not going to be happy with this. He's going to do it anyways. But the Democrats don't. The Democratic leadership does not seem willing to do the same thing. The attacks on this, Paul, shows they're not really interested in having a reasonable discussion. Nancy Pelosi comes out and calls the bill, this is Make America White Again. Chuck Schumer says this is just a sop to the hardliners. Those are comments you make about something when you want to end the discussion.
And
not
I think the Democrats have to worry a little bit about this. This increasingly unhinged rhetoric from Nancy Pelosi. There's a lot of Democrats out there in the heartland. There are Democrats running for the Senate from purple states that I don't think are there because they understand the American people do, as I say, want something done about the Dreamers. If the Democrats go into a mode of total resistance, the blame is going to start falling back on them. And I might add one more thing. Senator John Thune at the Republican retreat this week said, this thing should be really simple. Do the Dreamers and do border security. Leave the lottery and the chain migration out of it. That's as much as we can pull off. And I think he's right.
Well, I think you can. I agree with that. That's a good deal for it can get through the Senate. I'm not sure that deal can get through the House. You might have to put in some more on the restriction side to get through the House. All right, still ahead, President Trump touting the state of the American economy in his address Tuesday night. So just how much political credit can he take?
Two words I don't think we'll hear tonight on the economy. Thanks, Obama.
Since the election, we have created 2.4 million new jobs. After years and years of wage stagnation, we are finally seeing rising wages. Unemployment claims have hit a 45-year low. The stock market has smashed one record after another, gaining $8 trillion and more in value in just this short period of time.
That was President Trump taking a victory lap Tuesday night in his State of the Union address. The Labor Department reported Friday that the U.S. economy added 200,000 jobs in January, and paychecks rose at the fastest pace in 8 years. But critics say the president can't take credit for the recovery.
The president thinks our economic recovery is all thanks to him, when reality is that he owes a lot of it to Barack Obama.
We're back with Dan Henninger, Jason Riley, and James Freeman. So, James, my favorite bull.
Oh, thank you.
Just how strong is the economy, or was he overstating things?
Well, I don't think it's an overstatement to say it has been growing much faster lately than it did during the period of his predecessor. So for the first full term that Donald Trump was in office, that second quarter of last year,
yeah.
From then on, first full quarter, I should say, it's been operating at a higher plane, and we got a Friday jobs report that shows the highest wages in almost a decade, highest wage growth, and 200,000 jobs. It's not where we can get, but it's better than the average of last year, better than the average of the year before. So this is progress.
Well, how much credit does Trump get for it, or is this, as Chuck Schumer says, just the tail end of the Obama breeze?
Well, let's put it this way. Donald Trump, not Barack Obama, is responsible for the corporate tax rate dropping by 40%, okay? And for instituting 100 immediate percent expensing on new capital investment. These are having huge effects on the economy. There's no question about it, Paul. I mean, inversions and corporate inversions, moving headquarters overseas, that's going to stop. So I think we're going into a period here, and Chuck Schumer should be worried about this, where the animal spirits, the dynamism of the economy is becoming similar to what happened in Ronald Reagan's second term or Bill Clinton's second term. And when those happened, they did pretty well in the midterm elections. Bill Clinton actually gained some seats. And if Donald Trump is producing an economy similar to that environment, the Republicans could be on very strong ground in November.
Well, all presidents take credit for good economic news.
They sure do.
This is some evidence of normalcy on the part of Donald Trump, frankly. All presidents do this.
But does he deserve it? That's the point.
It's true that many of these trends began under President Obama. But let's remember, the Great Recession ended 6 months after Obama was elected, and we saw 7.5 years of the slowest economic recovery since World War II. Donald Trump campaigned saying, I'm going to speed things up.
From 2 to 3% or higher.
And he has. We've seen faster economic growth. We've seen more consumer spending. Inflation is in check. Business confidence is up. And yes, this is lighter regulation. And that is all, I think, of a piece. And that's what we're seeing when we see faster growth today. So yes, he deserves credit for that.
Okay, so here's the other line that the critics are using, James. Right. It says, oh, well, the one is, okay, it was just Obama. All right, so he's just continuing. The other one is it's just a bubble. It's the bond bubble, it's the stock bubble, it's all just funny money from the Fed, and it's all going to come crashing down.
Well, if you want to say there was a government debt bubble created by the Fed and central banks around the world, I think you got a pretty good case. That's not something you can blame on Donald Trump. That's something where you really have to say thanks, Obama, because I think central bankers figured that was the only way they could get growth to print money.
Okay, but all right, but having said that, then, how big a threat as the Fed unwinds its quantitative easing, as it starts to normalize interest rates, and they're going up. Let's face it, the bond market is going up, and if you're holding bonds, there's a bond shock going on. Modest now, who knows how big it will be. What do you think? A threat.
Okay, so if we're talking about stocks in the market, certainly they've had very good years in the 80s and 90s when interest rates were significantly higher than they are now. But in terms of the real economy, I think the Trump program is our only hope for managing this transition, getting away from governments trying to conjure prosperity by printing money and allowing individuals in the market to make decisions. And just to add, the good news on wages in January doesn't count these one-time bonuses. And so you're seeing the investment now, and probably a lot of good news to come.
Just to elaborate on James's point, I think that this idea that the handoff to better fiscal policy, tax cuts, tax incentives, deregulation, getting the private economy to kind of take over and make more risk and boost capital investment, taking over from whatever stimulus the Fed had, is crucial here to keep the recovery going.
Yeah, and if it keeps the recovery going, there will be political implications. I mean, the Wall Street Journal NBC poll just recently indicated that 57% of Democrats are satisfied with the way the economy is going, a number Obama never achieved across the entire breadth of his presidency.
And the Democratic strategy seems to be, we're going to pretend things are not as good as they actually are. We're just going to poo-poo all of this good news coming out of the economy and hope that voters don't notice bigger paychecks and so forth.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Still ahead, Congressman Trey Gowdy, the latest House Republican, to announce that he won't seek re-election. So what's behind the wave of retirements, and can the GOP hold on to its majority in November? South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy, the latest House Republican to call it quits, announcing Wednesday that he will not seek re-election. Gowdy, head of the powerful House Oversight Committee, is the second Republican committee chair to retire this week following Appropriations Chief Rodney Frelinghuysen of New Jersey. In all, Republicans are defending 33 open House seats in November, compared to just 16 for Democrats. Democrats need to pick up 24 seats to retake the majority. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and James Freeman. So, Kim, why are all these Republicans getting out of town?
Well, look, first of all, some of the press reports overstate the number of people who are going, because some of them were brought into the Trump administration when they first came on, guys like Mick Mulvaney. But it is true that about twice as many are getting out than Democrats at the moment. Some of them are going on to run for higher office in their own states, in the Senate or for governorship. Some of them are being pushed out because of the sex scandals that's been going on in Washington. But look, some of these guys, I think, are simply, they see a potential wave or a loss of the House, and they want to get out while the getting is still good.
Well, and Dan, there are few worse jobs in America, or maybe the world, than being in the minority in the House of Representatives, especially after you've been in the majority. You basically are irrelevant.
Yeah, you are. Increasingly, a lot of these members of the House and Senate feel that even when they're in the majority, they're irrelevant. I mean, there is a problem of, if it's a problem, of polarization and gridlock. You grind and you grind. You're not really getting anything done.
Oh, but they just passed tax reform. That was huge.
It was huge. But again, then you've got the Trump effect that Kim alluded to. They think perhaps there's going to be a wave in November. So they just feel like it is just not worth it anymore. And you could argue, so what? I mean, I'm always theoretically in favor of gridlock in Washington. The biggest problem is that spending just kind of inexorably inexorably keeps going higher. And if they weren't there, you just leave the career Democrats behind to pump the spending up.
One other factor, James, Ed Royce, for example, a California Foreign Affairs chairman, he was term limited out at the end of this term because Republicans put term limits on, I think it's 8 years on a committee chair.
Right.
And Democrats don't. So if once you're a committee chair, you can serve as long as you stay in the House, but not if you're a Republican.
Yeah, I think when you look at the overall number, you can say, oh, they're all in fear of the blue wave and they're leaving before it crashes. But as you start to look at the details, you see a lot of them. Bob Goodlatte's another one coming to the end of a committee chairmanship. Jeb Hensarling. Once you've done that in Congress, it's not necessarily that much fun to go back to being a backbencher or whatever. But I think in terms of the overall House, I would say maybe they do need to appreciate minority status if it comes to that, because you do get to torment the majority with no accountability. But I don't think it will come to that. I think the Republicans have set themselves up getting some great policy victories, the tax cut in particular, and this is not going to be the disaster that Democrats were predicting.
Well, I'll tell you, though, I mean, the economy is not destiny when it comes to midterm elections, James. So you look at 1994, the economy was actually relatively decent. Republicans swept. You've seen that before in American history. And, bigger determinants, presidential approval rating.
Right.
Trump's got to get back up to the mid-40s, I think, low to mid-40s at least, certainly above 40. Otherwise, you're going to see, I think, a greater potential for a wave. Republicans they'll have a money advantage, perhaps, in the House, but midterm elections typically go to the out party.
Sorry.
Well, I was going to quickly say, but you got this so-called generic ballot, which in January had the Democrats leading the Republicans by 17 points. It's now down to 7 points. And if you look inside those things, you can see independents, who are going to be very important here, gradually going towards the Republicans, and soft Republicans moving more solidly towards the Republicans. I think the trend is pretty good for the Republicans.
There's one poll, the Monmouth poll, says it's only 2, Kim, but that 7-point difference, if that holds, if it's about there, that's about 24, 25 seats. So it would be right on the cusp of a Speaker Pelosi.
Right. This is going to be close any way you look at it, I think. But look, there's a couple of reasons to also not look quite so badly upon this. One, I think there should be a little bit, people should feel happy. Some of these guys, remember, it's been 8 years since the Republicans retook over the House. And the particular crew of people who ran in that takeover were reformers, and they made a pledge that they weren't always going to stay in Washington and become lifers. So I think part of this is you're also seeing them fulfilling that promise. But also, if you look at the people who are retiring in their districts, a lot of these are districts that the Republicans should be able to keep because of the way that they're cut and because they lean Republican. So if the GOP can keep that generic ballot within range, and if the president can keep his numbers up and the economy comes in, this should be pretty competitive.
Well, in some of those states where Royce in California, Darrell Issa in California, Frelinghuysen in New Jersey, though there's going to be tough states to hold those seats, James, briefly.
Yeah, but generally, I think this is different from 1982 when Republicans lost a couple dozen seats. They did not make the mistake that Republicans made then. They had the tax cut take effect immediately. 1982 was a terrible year. GDP shrank by 2%. This is going to be a good year, most likely.
Because the tax cut takes place immediately this time.
Yes.
All right, when we come back, hits and misses of the week. Time now for our hits and misses of the week. Kim, first to you.
Paul, this is a hit for Xerox, which after 115 years will be no more. It's being taken over by Fujifilm. This is a company that totally transformed the world. Its copiers obliterating the need for carbon copy paper. It even became a verb. Some are lamenting its demise, that it couldn't keep up in the digital age. But I would prefer to embrace organizations that engage in radical transformation, even when radical transformation ends up making them extinct. It's part of the beauty of the American system and ingenuity.
All right, Jason.
This is a miss for the rapper Jay-Z, Paul, who went on CNN to complain about President Trump's crude language. Now, Jay-Z is a man who's become very wealthy, rapping and promoting songs that promote gun violence and drug dealing. His songs say things about women that would make Stormy Daniels blush, Paul, okay? I'm not saying President Trump is above such criticism. I've criticized him for it. You've criticized him for it. But he might be above such criticism from the likes of Jay-Z.
Okay. James.
Paul, this is a hit to actor Clint Eastwood, who reportedly, according to a website called MovieWeb, is considering in his late 80s a return to acting on the big screen. Now, he would know better than anyone that a man's got to know his limitations. But I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say, make our day, Clint. Come back to the movies.
May he live forever.
Yes.
Well, I'm giving a monumental miss this week to the Cleveland Indians, who announced that they are not going to allow their players to wear Chief Wahoo on their uniforms starting in 2019. Paul, this is a craven cave by Indians owner Paul Dolan to the hyper-political correctness of MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred. And I would suggest that the people in Cleveland go into resistance, show up at the Jake this year with their stadium emblazoned with a Chief Wahoo, T-shirts, flags, the whole thing. Start a resistance.
Henniger's going on opening day, I'll tell you. And remember, if you have your own hit or miss, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to all of you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. Hope to see you right here next week.